The mountain trapper watched his brother reject the orc bride, then married her himself. "Do not let me freeze for a man who does not want me." The orc woman stood trembling in the mountain snow, abandoned beside a broken bridal sled as the storm swallowed the trail behind her. She was huge, muscular, and fierce-looking, yet her green hands had gone numb, and her breathing came painfully slow. The trapper had watched his own brother reject her at the cabin door minutes earlier. Instead of following him inside, he crossed the snow in his patched brown coat, dropped his axe, and wrapped his only wool blanket around her broad shoulders. Beneath her torn white furs, he noticed a silver clan seal and a ceremonial braid clasp, far too costly for an ordinary bride. She stared at his calloused hands in disbelief. He did not yet know why his brother had refused her, or who she really was. If you enjoy emotional stories where kindness matters more than blood, status, or fear, stay with us until the end. Subscribe for more Human-Orc stories where two very different worlds discover that respect can begin with one simple choice. Matthias Crowell knew what the cold did before. Most people understood they were in danger. Avelka was still shivering, but not as hard as before. Her movements had become slow, and twice her eyes lost focus while she tried to stand. Matthias had seen hunters reach that point. He had also seen one man insist he felt better only minutes before his heart stopped. His older brother, Edmund, remained inside the lower cabin, with a warm firelight behind him for months. Edmund had spoken confidently about the marriage. The northern clans needed southern salt and market roads. The humans of Crowell Pass needed timber, iron, and safer access through the northern valleys. Or custom sometimes bound major agreements through family. So Edmund had agreed to marry a woman called Avelka Dren. He had known she was an orc. Knowing was not the same as seeing. When Avelka emerged from the storm, nearly 7 feet tall, green-skinned, broad-shouldered and white-tusked beneath a bridal mantle, Edmund's courage collapsed. He looked at her, remembered every bloody border tale he had heard as a boy, and told her he could not marry her. Now Matthias put Avelka's arm across his shoulders. Edmund called after him that the situation was complicated. Matthias answered through the wind that someone freezing was not complicated. The rest could wait. He began climbing toward his own cabin. The distance was short in summer. In the storm, it felt endless. Snow rose around Matthias's boots. Wind cut sideways through the pines. And Avelka stumbled often enough that he stopped pretending she could manage alone. She tried to pull away each time. Pride, apparently, survived cold better than strength. Matthias refused to release her. His cabin finally appeared through the white haze, a squat shape of pine logs and fieldstone beneath dark trees. He shouldered the door open and helped Avelka inside. She stopped beneath the entrance beam, because she had to duck. Matthias had never considered the cabin unusually small until an orc woman entered it. A narrow bed stood against one wall. A pine table, 2 stools, a wooden chest, and several shelves filled the rest. His bow, axe, and traps hung neatly near the door. The roof had been repaired so many times that no 2 rows of shingles matched. But the room was clean and dry. He sat Avelka on the bed. The frame creaked. Her feet extended beyond the end. For a moment, Matthias almost smiled. Avelka caught the expression and looked offended. He gestured at the bed, making it clear the furniture was the problem, not her. Something faint shifted at the corner of her mouth. Then she began shaking again. Matthias warmed water and helped remove her frozen boots only after she understood what he intended and gave permission. Her left ankle was badly bruised, but did not seem broken. He wrapped warm stones in wool and placed them near her feet. Avelka watched every movement. Her eyes checked his knife, his bow, the door, then his hands. She did not trust him. Matthias did not expect her to. He poured rabbit broth into a wooden bowl and held it out. Avelka hesitated. Matthias tasted a spoonful from the pot. That was enough. She began eating slowly, then faster as hunger overcame caution. His pantry was not full. He knew exactly how much barley remained and how many strips of smoked meat hung behind the cloth at the back shelf. Winter has been poor. He filled Avelka's bowl again anyway. As she shifted beneath the blanket, Matthias saw the quality of her torn crimson dress. Fine silver thread formed mountain branches along the collar. A heavy clasp shaped like a pine tree rested near her throat. With 5 smaller branches surrounding it, the silver could probably have bought everything Matthias owned. Avelka saw him looking and covered it. Immediately, Matthias turned back toward the hearth. Her expression changed. She had expected a question. He gave her none. That night he offered her the bed and spread his bearskin beside the fire. Avelka objected through a mixture of formal human words and gestures. It took Matthias several attempts to understand that surrendering one's sleeping place carried some deeper meaning among her people. He finally explained that an injured guest simply got the warmer bed. Avelka pointed at how far her feet hung over the end. This time, both of them almost smiled. She lay down. The bed complained once more. Matthias pretended not to hear. Near midnight he woke to Avelka speaking in her sleep. Most of the orcish words meant nothing to him. One name did. Avelka Dren had been an important northern matriarch killed 3 years before. Her death had nearly started. A new border war. Avelka whispered another phrase first. Hearth. Matthias assumed it was a prayer. He added wood to the fire and went back to sleep. Morning revealed how completely the storm had erased the mountain. The wrecked bridal sled still stood below, but there were no visible tracks leading away from it. No riders, no guards, only snow. When Matthias returned inside, Avelka was awake with a short dagger in one hand. The blade was well made. Dark red stone decorated its hilt. Her eyes were fixed on the door. Matthias waited. After several breaths, she lowered the weapon. She told him someone might have followed her. He asked what had happened to her escort. Avelka said only that they had become separated after the sled failed. The answer was clearly incomplete. Matthias accepted it. That seemed to trouble her more than questioning would have. At breakfast, Matthias gave her more meat than he gave himself, she noticed, when he turned to fetch water. Their bowls mysteriously changed places. He looked at her. Avelka continued eating from the smaller portion with perfect seriousness. Matthias sat down without correcting her. It became the first joke they shared without words. Matthias had spent most of his adult life becoming good at needing very little. He was 31, lean from work rather than hunger, with dark brown hair that was usually too long, and grey-green eyes people often mistook for sadness. His hands knew timber, rope, leather, traps, roofs, splints, herbs, and weather better than they knew anything delicate. His father, Abram, had once managed the Eastern Pass Station and traded with northern orcs when other humans considered it foolish. Abram believed that if someone reached your door injured or freezing, species mattered less than the fire inside. Matthias had understood the lesson properly only after losing his mother. A spring flood destroyed the lower bridge when Matthias was 20. His mother became ill, while the healer remained trapped on the opposite bank. Matthias tried carrying her through a flooded ford. The river took his feet. Another man dragged them back before both disappeared downstream. His mother survived the water, but not the cold. Afterward, she died 2 nights later. Everyone told Matthias the river had been impossible. Part of him continued hearing only that someone needed help, and he had failed. Years later, after Abram died, Edmund inherited the pass station and sawmill, while Matthias took the upper cabin and trap lines. There was no quarrel over it. Edmund understood merchants and ledgers. Matthias understood the mountain. Their lives simply moved apart. Avelka's arrival brought them together again in the worst possible way. By the second morning, Matthias discovered she had hidden more than expensive silver. She rose from the bed. Pain crossed her face, and one green hand pressed against her ribs. Blood appeared between her fingers. Matthias brought boiled cloth, salve, and strong spirit. When he reached toward the fastening of her dress, Avelka caught his wrist, even injured. Her hand completely circled it. Matthias stopped. He placed the supplies beside her and turned away, explaining that she could tend the wound herself or ask him to help. Several moments passed. Then Avelka said his name. Matthias turned. The wound ran along her ribs, where something sharp had cut through leather. It was not deep, but heat around the edges suggested the beginning of infection. He cleaned it. Carefully, Avelka made almost no sound. Her fingers gripped the bed frame. Wood cracked beneath them. Matthias looked down. A thin split had appeared in the pine. His mouth moved despite himself. Avelka saw. Her eyes narrowed. He tried not to smile. He failed. For one moment, she looked ready to be offended. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. It was the first softness he saw in her. The next few days formed a quiet pattern. Matthias shortened his trapline so he was never away long. Avelka rested badly and obeyed instructions. Even worse, on the fourth day he returned to find half his woodpile split. Avelka stood beside it with his heaviest axe. Her ankle was still wrapped. Matthias looked at the wood, then at her. He informed her that recovery generally worked better when the patient did not declare war on the firewood. She understood enough to know he was mocking her. Avelka placed the axe against the wall with great dignity. Matthias pointed to one badly split log and suggested she had finally met an opponent capable of resisting her. She laughed. The sound startled both of them. It was deep, warm, and free. Avelka stopped almost immediately. Matthias pointed to the crooked log again. She laughed a second time. The cabin changed after that. They began teaching each other words. Avelka's human speech was formal but improving. Matthias's Orcish was terrible. She taught him a red fur word connected to honor. Its older meaning, she explained, was close to remaining when leaving would be easier. Matthias pronounced it incorrectly. His version apparently meant something involving an unusually stubborn goat. Avelka laughed until her ribs hurt. Matthias decided his version was better. He taught her the local word Hearthside. It meant the place near a fire where a person could expect safety. Avelka repeated it several times. Her language had words for shelter, clan home, and guarded camp, but none with exactly the same feeling. Other differences surfaced naturally. For several days, Avelka believed Matthias let her enter the cabin first, because he expected the stronger person to face danger before him. Matthias eventually explained human courtesy. She seemed genuinely confused that humans might stand in cold weather deciding who should use a perfectly safe doorway first. She also found his need to hang a blanket for privacy strange. Orc campaign camps offered little space for modesty. Matthias's ears became red when she teased him about it. He learned that her bluntness was not hostility. She learned that his restraint was not fear. Their meals remained simple. Rabbit stew, barley, flatbread, dried fruit, roots. Avelka never complained. Soon they stopped pretending Matthias could secretly give her the better portion without being caught. They placed the pot between them and ate from it fairly. One evening, while Matthias wrapped warm stones for her ankle, Avelka asked who had taught him. He said, his mother. Something in his voice must have revealed too much. Avelka did not push. Later, beside a dying fire, Matthias told her about the flood. He spoke about his mother's weight in his arms, the freezing water, the shame that remained, even though he knew another crossing would probably have killed them both. Avelka listened. When he finished, she placed a closed fist against the center of her chest. Matthias had seen northern traders use the gesture around graves. Avelka explained that it meant another person's burden had been witnessed, not removed, not corrected, witnessed. Matthias looked at the coals. People had spent years telling him to stop blaming himself. Avelka was the first person who allowed the grief to exist without feeding it. The next night she offered something of her own. She spoke of Circa, not the famous northern matriarch from border stories, a mother. Circa hated sweet wine, misplaced her gloves, and could remember the name of every widow receiving winter grain. She taught Avelka to sharpen a spear and count grain stores with equal seriousness. Then Avelka described the ambush that killed her. A false road signal, arrows from high ground. Circa carried home beneath a cloak 7 days of mourning. On the 8th day, people were already waiting for strength. Avelka did not explain why they had been waiting for her. Matthias assumed she had belonged to Circa's household, perhaps as a daughter or close relative. That was enough to explain the silver and formal manners. He did not ask for more. Avelka almost told him. Several times. Each time she stopped, she had learned early that people changed around certain truths. Voices became careful, jokes disappeared, kindness became difficult to separate from ambition. Matthias had laughed at her for cracking his bed. He had told her she was foolish with an axe. He had given her food, while apparently believing she was only an important clan woman. Avelka wanted a little more time before that disappeared. Her silence was understandable. It was still a mistake. Matthias made one of his own before the week ended. Avelka's ankle had improved enough that she offered to accompany him along the nearest trap line. Matthias refused. He claimed the slope remained dangerous. Then he quietly went farther than he had planned because one of his valuable traps sat beyond a warming snow shelf. A crust collapsed beneath his leg. He twisted his knee and spent nearly an hour freeing himself. When he finally limped back, Avelka was halfway up the trail following his tracks. Her expression was cold enough to rival the weather. Matthias expected relief. He received anger. She told him that a man who refused help and then risked himself for a piece of iron had very little right to lecture anyone about stubbornness. Matthias argued that the trap line was his responsibility. Avelka answered that carrying responsibility alone did not automatically make a person wise. He hated how correct she was. They returned in silence. Inside the cabin, Matthias tried wrapping his own knee. Avelka watched for several moments, then took the cloth and tied it properly. Neither apologized at first. Later, Matthias admitted he had gone too far. Avelka admitted following him with a healing ankle was not especially wise either. The argument mattered. Avelka saw that Matthias's independence could turn into pride. Matthias saw that strength did not make Avelka the only stubborn person in the room. 2 days later, he slipped while clearing snow from the low roof. He fell from the eave, landed hard and lost his breath. Avelka reached him before he could stand. She caught his coat and pulled him upright almost effortlessly, then checked his head, ribs and arms with frantic concentration. Matthias stared. She was frightened, not irritated, afraid for him. He placed one hand over hers. The touch was deliberate. No bandage, no cold, no practical reason. Avelka stopped moving. Her hand was large enough to cover both of his, but she turned it slowly beneath his fingers and held him with surprising gentleness. Neither spoke. The moment lasted only a few breaths. It changed everything. Afterward, Matthias noticed things he had tried not to notice. The amber gold color of Avelka's eyes, the small chip near one tusk, the way her black hair loosened from its braid after sleep. Avelka noticed the lines beside his eyes when he smiled, and how he spoke to his old mule, as though the animal deserved explanations rather than commands. Neither called what was growing between them love. They barely knew what waited outside the mountain, but absence had started to matter. When Matthias left, Avelka listened to his return. When Avelka slept longer than usual, Matthias found reasons to cross the room and make sure her breathing remained steady. Then Edmund sent a message. The folded parchment was tied beneath a pine branch on the lower trail. Edmund wrote that northern representatives would soon begin searching. He wanted Avelka to move away from the Crowell property before they arrived. He claimed the failed marriage had already endangered the treaty. If people discovered Matthias, had been sheltering the rejected bride alone. They might believe his brother had interfered for personal gain. Edmund also said he regretted what had happened. Fear had overcome him. He wanted a chance to repair the damage. Avelka watched Matthias read. When he explained, her face hardened. She asked whether Edmund meant to restore the marriage. Matthias said he did not know. Avelka answered that she did. A man who wanted a bride did not leave her outside to freeze. Matthias had no defense for his brother. He placed the parchment into the fire. Avelka watched the edges curl black. She asked whether he was willing to lose Edmund because of her. Matthias said Edmund's choices belonged to Edmund. The answer stayed with her. Avelka came from a culture where clan loyalty could outweigh almost everything. Matthias loved his brother. He still judged the action. That made Avelka respect him. It also made her secret heavier. The road began clearing. Her ankle strengthened. The wound beneath her ribs closed. Every improvement should have pleased Matthias. Instead, he found himself setting 2 bowls on the table and imagining the day he would return to one. Avelka caught herself repairing a shutter beside him and wondering why a poor cabin felt quieter and safer than the finest rooms she knew. One night, they sat shoulder to shoulder beside the hearth. Avelka asked why Matthias had never married. He joked that the upper mountain offered few opportunities. Her expression told him she wanted the truth. Matthias admitted solitude had become easier after losing people he loved. If no one became necessary, no one could leave a hole when they disappeared. Avelka understood too quickly. She said being surrounded by people could also become lonely when every relationship carried an obligation. Matthias asked why she had agreed to marry Edmund. Avelka answered carefully. The marriage was meant to protect a peace both peoples needed. Matthias asked whether she had wanted Edmund. She had wanted peace. She had been willing to honor the marriage. Those were not the same thing. He asked whether she expected love. Avelka shook her head. Only respect. The simplicity of the answer made Edmund's rejection feel uglier. Hoofbeats came the next morning. Many. Avelka stood before Matthias reached the window. Her posture changed instantly. The woman who laughed over bad pronunciation disappeared behind something controlled and powerful. Matthias took his bow. She tried to stop him. He refused. Whatever waited outside had frightened her. That was enough. 12 orc riders emerged between the pines. They wore dark leather beneath red-grey winter cloaks. Long spears rested beside their saddles. The leader dismounted the moment she saw Avelka. She was an older orc woman with a scar running from temple to jaw. She crossed the snow, then dropped to one knee. Every rider behind her did the same. Matthias lowered his bow. The captain struck a fist against her chest and addressed Avelka. First Hearth, Matthias knew the title. Everyone involved in the border treaty did. First Hearth of the Red Fur Alliance, leader of 5 clans. The closest human word was Queen. He looked at the silver clasp. 5 branches, at the formal posture, at the hidden strength beneath every quiet answer. Avelka drew a silver seal from beneath her sleeve. The same 5-branched tree covered its face. The truth arrived all at once. Matthias had been sharing turnip soup with one of the most powerful people in the northern mountains. The scarred captain introduced herself as Odrissa Fen, commander of Avelka's personal guard. Her report was worse than Matthias expected. Several missing guards had been found alive. The sled harness had been cut almost through before the descent. Hidden attackers struck after the runner failed. The storm separated everyone before the attackers could finish what they had started. One captured man carried southern-made arrowheads in quantities too large to be accidental. Someone had wanted Avelka dead on human land. Someone had also wanted the death blamed on humans. A war could have followed before spring. Avelka ordered her guards to secure the slope. Odrissa hesitated to leave. Avelka repeated the command. The cabin door closed. Silence settled. Matthias placed his bow against the wall. He did not look at Avelka. She explained that after the attack, she had no idea who could be trusted. Humans might have been involved. Orcs might have been involved. Even members of her own escort could have betrayed her. Matthias understood the reason. He still felt hurt. He asked whether she ever intended to tell him. Avelka answered yes. He asked when. She had no answer. Matthias finally faced her. He had told her about his mother. His fear. The part of himself he most disliked. He had believed they were slowly becoming equally honest. Avelka had let him believe she was only a woman from an important household. She insisted that everything she had shown him in the cabin had been real. Matthias asked how he was supposed to know which parts were real when the largest truth had been hidden. Avelka flinched. She admitted she had been afraid he would change. Everyone changed once the title appeared. Matthias answered that hiding it had changed something too. Then Avelka asked the question he did not want. Would he have treated her differently if he had known? Matthias could not lie. Yes, he would have watched every word. I wondered whether every kindness looked like an attempt to earn a reward. He probably would not have teased her for cracking the bed. Pain crossed Avelka's face because that was exactly what she had feared. Both of them were right. That made the hurt harder. Avelka said she had to return north. Matthias nodded. She put on the white mantle he had repaired with rough brown thread. Her fingers touched the uneven stitching. For several seconds neither moved. Then the first arrow shattered the window. Matthias drove into Avelka's side and pulled downward. His weight barely shifted her, but surprise did. They fell behind the stone hearth. A second arrow buried itself in a beam. Outside, horses screamed. Odrissa shouted. Matthias opened the narrow rear hatch behind the woodpile, used in winter to reach the chimney ledge. Avelka understood immediately. They crawled through. White-cloaked figures moved between the trees below. Avelka saw narrow blue cords around their arms. Recognition flashed across her face. Two attackers spotted them. One charged uphill. Avelka caught his spear shaft, twisted and sent him backward into the snow. The second came toward Matthias. Matthias did not try to match an orc warrior's strength. He ran sideways between the trees. The attacker followed. Near an old pine, Matthias cut a buried rope attached to an unused deadfall line. A heavy log swung down. It struck the warrior across the legs and threw him aside. Matthias pointed uphill. Fresh snow had gathered beneath the granite ridge, a loaded shelf. If they could break a small section, the attackers below would be forced back. They climbed. Arrows passed through branches. One struck a trunk inches from Matthias. At the base of the ridge, he used his axe to crack the crust beside exposed stone. Nothing. He struck again. A fracture raced farther than expected. Matthias's stomach dropped. The whole shelf moved. He shouted for Avelka to run. Snow released. The mountain came down. Matthias turned, caught his boot beneath a buried root, and fell. Avelka was already beyond the worst line. She could have escaped. She came back. One powerful hand caught the back of his coat. She dragged him toward a granite outcrop. The avalanche hit before they reached full shelter. Avelka turned him over. Snow drove them against stone. For several terrifying seconds, Matthias could not breathe. Then Avelka moved above him. She forced an arm upward, opening an air pocket. Together they clawed toward the surface. Cold air reached Matthias's face. He gasped. Blood ran from Avelka's temple. Matthias reached toward her. She ignored the blood and began digging around his trapped leg. Even now, her first concern was him. The anger inside Matthias did not vanish. It became smaller than what she had just done. When his leg finally came free, neither moved away immediately. They were kneeling in the snow, breathing hard, faces only inches apart. Matthias raised a trembling hand to the blood beside Avelka's temple. She allowed his fingers to touch her cheek. For a second, her eyes closed. Not from weakness, from relief. Avelka then pressed her forehead carefully against his. Her tusks brushed the cold edge of his scarf. Neither kissed. The moment felt too raw for that. They simply stayed there, alive, touching, while broken snow settled around them. Matthias understood something before he had words for it. Whatever happened after the truth between them, losing Avelka would hurt. Avelka seemed to understand the same thing. Then Odrissa called from below. Reality returned. By the time they reached the cabin, the guards had driven off most of the attackers and captured several. Matthias sat Avelka on the bed, she objected. He cleaned the cut on her temple anyway. His hands moved exactly as they had before he knew her title. Avelka watched them. Matthias finally explained what hurt. Not the power, not the wealth, not even the title. She had wanted him to trust her while refusing to trust him. Avelka accepted the accusation. No excuse. She admitted she had been selfish. The cabin was the first place in years where she had not been first Hearth before being Avelka. She had wanted to keep that feeling. Matthias looked around at the chipped bowl, cracked bed, and crooked firewood. He understood. He also admitted her title frightened him. Avelka asked whether she did. Matthias looked at the massive green woman who had returned into an avalanche for him. No, she did not. Odrissa entered before either could say more. One captured attacker had spoken. He belonged to the Stone Branch clan. The blue cord already suggested that. He claimed orders had passed through a quartermaster connected to Varek. Avelka became very still. Varek was a respected Stone Branch war captain. He had served Circa and openly opposed the human treaty. One prisoner's accusation was not enough to seize a captain whose clan counted thousands of warriors. Arrests without formal evidence could create exactly the civil break whoever planned the attack wanted. The damaged harness, payment marks, and surviving witnesses had to reach the Northern Council. Until then, Varek was accused, not condemned. Before evening, more red fur riders reached Matthias's cabin. The quiet clearing became a military camp. Maps covered his table. Messengers came and went. Avelka changed into dark red traveling armor with black fur over one shoulder. Her silver seal rested openly at her throat. Matthias watched the woman from his cabin become something larger without becoming someone else. Captains waited for her decisions. She gave them quickly. Roads were watched, prisoners separated, riders sent north. No messenger traveled alone. Matthias admired her. He also felt the distance between their worlds more clearly than ever. Near dusk, another rider appeared below. Humans, Edmund. Odrissa's guards stopped him. Matthias went down. His brother looked exhausted. He had heard the fighting and learned enough from passing messengers to understand Avelka's rank. His first question was whether she was alive. Matthias said yes. Relief showed. Then Edmund began explaining. He had panicked during the storm. Old memories of border violence returned when Avelka appeared. He had believed fear was behind him until an orc bride stood at his door. Matthias believed that part. Then Edmund asked whether the original marriage could perhaps still be repaired now that everyone understood the true stakes. Matthias stared at him. Edmund mentioned the treaty and the damage already done to Crowell Pass. Matthias asked whether he wanted Avelka or simply wanted his old life back. Edmund had no answer. Avelka had come down the slope behind them. She heard enough. Edmund bowed and tried to apologize. Avelka listened. Then she made clear that fear could be forgiven more easily than deciding a person became desirable after learning her value. The marriage agreement between them was finished. Edmund looked toward Matthias. Then I rode away. The following morning, Avelka prepared to leave. Matthias had spent half the night awake. Everything sensible told him their time together belonged to the storm. A strange crossing, nothing more. Then he imagined the cabin after she left. One bowl. No deep laugh when he ruined an orcish word. No enormous figure ducking under the beam. The silence he had once called peace looked suddenly like loneliness he had learned to tolerate. Avelka entered before dawn in full traveling armor. She told him she owed him her life. Matthias immediately refused the idea of debt. Avelka said she knew. That was why her next offer was different. She wanted him to come north, not as a servant, not as payment, not as a husband, simply because the cabin had made them feel close. As the man she wanted to know once the storm was no longer trapping them together. The restraint made the offer more powerful. They had known each other less than 2 weeks. Avelka would not turn gratitude into marriage. She offered Matthias a place under her protection while they learned whether what began by the hearth could survive her real world. He could refuse. Nothing would be taken from him. Matthias asked for 1 hour. He walked the nearest trapline. The mountain helped him think. For years, familiarity had been enough. The cabin, the traps, the creek. A life small enough that nothing new could hurt him. Avelka had already made it feel smaller. He returned before the hour ended. He would go north, but he would remain himself. He would work, return to the mountains sometimes, disagree when he believed she was wrong. Avelka smiled. She said that was the man she intended to bring. They joined forearms in the red fur manor. A promise, not yet married. The journey north lasted 4 days. Matthias learned almost immediately that the size difference between their peoples affected ordinary life in ridiculous ways. At the first road lodge, an orc-sized drinking cup required both his hands. Avelka silently replaced it with one used by younger riders. Matthias stared at her. Her mouth twitched. That one joke taught enough. He did not need to be reminded every hour that doors, benches, horses, and meal portions were designed for larger bodies. More important was watching Avelka outside his cabin. She questioned patrol captains, checked stores at road lodges, listened to reports, and remembered the names of injured guards. The quiet woman he had known remained there. So did a leader Matthias had never imagined. Avelka watched him too. He helped a stable worker repair a broken sled tongue without being asked. He learned guards' names. He never mentioned saving her unless someone asked directly. He used no closeness to her as authority. His kindness survived witnesses. That mattered. Stronghold appeared on the 5th morning. The Stronghold occupied a mountain shelf above 2 rivers. Stone walls surrounded timber halls, workshops, grain houses, smithies, homes, and a busy winter market. Matthias had imagined a grim fortress. He found a city. The city found him just as interesting. People bowed when Avelka rode through the gate. Then they stared at the human beside her, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. One elderly woman made a protective sign. Matthias almost smiled. Humans at Crowell Pass used similar gestures when orc caravans arrived. Fear seemed to have the same face on both sides of the mountain. The Council of Branches gathered the next day. 7 senior elders represented the clans and great craft houses. Their objections were not simple. Some feared human merchants would use Matthias to influence Avelka. Others worried about future succession if their relationship became marriage. One elder argued that Edmund's rejection had publicly humiliated. The red fur and Matthias looked too much like the nearest available replacement. Another openly distrusted humans because his family had died in an old raid. Matthias preferred that honesty to false politeness. Then Varek entered. Matthias recognized him from the way Avelka's shoulders tightened. Varek was enormous even among orcs. Grey marked his black hair. A pale scar crossed his throat. No chains held him. The formal evidence had not yet reached Stronghold. Avelka had refused to arrest a powerful clan captain on one prisoner's word alone. Varek used that restraint. He denied involvement. He suggested rivals could easily wear stone branch colors. Then he turned toward Matthias. Why, he asked through cold reported words, had the first Hearth returned from a failed human marriage with the rejected groom's brother beside her? He called Matthias an opportunist. A poor trapper who had seen silver and recognized fortune. Avelka began to speak. Matthias stopped her. If she protected him through rank, every accusation would survive. He said that when he carried Avelka through the snow, he did not know her title. He expected no payment, no place at Stronghold, no marriage. He saw someone unable to hold a cup without shaking. At that moment, that mattered more than her silver. Varek asked what Matthias could offer a ruler of 5 clans. The question struck every insecurity Matthias had brought through the gates. He answered anyway. Choice. He could not give Avelka armies or strengthen one clan through blood. He could not offer wealth she did not already possess, but he would never treat her as a treaty clause that belonged to him because other people had agreed to it. If she chose him, he would remain. If she stopped choosing him, she remained free. The room became quiet. Varek invoked an old challenge to the suitability of a first Hearth's chosen companion. Combat had once been accepted. Avelka rejected that instantly. Matthias agreed. That surprised Varek. Matthias said proving a professional orc war captain could beat a human trapper with his fists would teach the council nothing it did not already know. Several elders laughed. Red Fur Law also recognized a challenge of service. 2 men could solve a problem affecting the people. The usefulness of the solution mattered more than strength. The problem already existed. A rockslide had crushed the old water channel, supplying Stronghold's lower quarter. Families were carrying water uphill by hand. Varek gathered warriors and began clearing stones. Matthias spent nearly an hour walking away from the slide. He studied the slope, the stream, and an abandoned livestock trough. Then he asked for a handful of workers, timber, rope, clay, and tools. Instead of clearing the blocked channel, Matthias built around it. The old trough became part of a raised bypass. Split pine extended the line. Clay sealed the joints. By sunset, water ran into the lower cistern again. Varek's men had barely opened part of the original channel. An old orc carpenter inspected Matthias's work, struck a fist against his chest and stepped back. Respect. Others followed. Matthias looked at the water. He had not become stronger than Varek. He had made Varek's strength irrelevant to the problem. Avelka saw him understand that he had earned something no title from her could provide. 2 days later, the first physical evidence from the mountain reached Stronghold, the cut harness, a payment token, the testimony of surviving guards. The trail led toward a stone branch quartermaster. The man disappeared before he could be seized. Varek continued denying involvement. Tension spread. Odrissa responded by assigning 2 guards to Matthias. He hated it. They followed him to the workshop. The market, the stables, when one stood 3 paces away while Matthias repaired a hinge, he finally confronted Avelka. He told her he had not left a lonely mountain life to become a prisoner inside a protected one. Avelka replied that someone had already tried to kill her twice and could easily decide killing Matthias would hurt her more. Matthias said protection could become another cage. Avelka said a dead man had very little use for freedom. The argument sharpened. He accused her of deciding for him because she possessed authority. She accused him of confusing stubbornness with independence. Both stopped. The words had found truth. After time apart, they returned calmer. Matthias agreed not to leave the walls without informing Odrissa until the threat ended. Avelka reduced the visible guard and placed watchers farther away. Neither won completely. Both found that strangely reassuring. A relationship, Matthias began to understand, was not proved by never fighting. It was proved by what people did after. Edmund reached Stronghold several days later with the Reeve of Crowell Pass and 2 guild elders. The failed marriage had complicated. Trade in the south and the original treaty wording still needed to be settled. Edmund requested an audience. Avelka granted it. He apologized publicly for leaving her outside in the storm. Then the Reeve explained that whatever the old marriage draft said, no human law forced Avelka to marry Edmund. Trade terms could be rewritten separately. Edmund looked toward Matthias and asked whether his brother truly believed he belonged in Drenhold. The question hurt because Matthias asked himself the same thing every day. Avelka began to answer. He stopped her. Matthias admitted he did not yet know whether he belonged. He was learning. What he did know was that Avelka was not something one brother could reject and another inherit. She had chosen. The room fell quiet. Edmund looked at Avelka, then at Matthias. For once, he did not make the moment about his trade or reputation. He apologized again, more simply, and asked for nothing. Avelka accepted. She did not erase what had happened. Edmund left Drenhold the next morning without another argument. Before riding south, he told Matthias that part of him envied the choice Matthias had made in the storm. Matthias answered that he had been afraid too. Courage had simply meant acting before fear became the only voice. The brothers did not embrace. They were not healed enough for that. But Edmund rode away without anger. Matthias's doubt inside Drenhold remained. He watched Avelka settle disputes, review grain stores, command patrols, and speak while powerful warriors listened. In his cabin, Matthias always knew where he fit. Here, he sometimes used the wrong greeting or missed half the meaning of a formal meal. He spent more time with craftsmen, hunters, and stable workers. They cared less about the ceremony. Avelka eventually found him outside the lower gate, repairing a widow's sled runner. Snow had collected in his hair. She sat beside him, despite wearing council clothing, unsuitable for frozen ground. Matthias admitted what had been troubling him. She belonged here. He did not. Avelka asked whether she had belonged in his cabin. Matthias smiled faintly. She barely fit through the doorway. That was not her meaning. She reminded him that he had never required her to become human before allowing her beside his heart. Why should she require him to become an orc before standing? Beside her, Matthias said people still saw his difference as weakness. Avelka answered that the first night they met, she had been larger, stronger, trained for war, and still losing to cold. He had been physically weaker. He saved her anyway. Strength changed with the problem. Matthias thought of the water channel. He understood. Avelka placed her hand over his. This time there was no injury, no emergency, no reason except desire. Matthias turned his hand beneath hers. He remembered the moment beneath the avalanche when their foreheads had touched, when a kiss had seemed possible but wrong for the fear surrounding them. Now nothing forced them together. That mattered. He leaned closer. Their first kiss was cautious. Her tusks made the angle unfamiliar, and Matthias nearly struck his nose against one. Avelka pulled back, briefly mortified. Matthias laughed. She gave his shoulder what she considered a light push. He moved half a step. That made both of them laugh. The second kiss went better. For several days, Matthias almost allowed himself to believe the worst was behind them. Then someone tried to kill him. The attempt came during the midwinter feast. Human delegates and red fur elders filled the great hall. Music echoed beneath dark rafters. Long tables carried roast meat, winter roots, and heavy bread. Matthias wore ceremonial clothes he disliked. Avelka sat beneath 5 clan banners in crimson and black. For the first time, Matthias fully understood why people became careful around her. Then Odrissa shouted. A servant behind Matthias produced a blade from beneath folded cloth. Matthias turned. The knife cut across his upper arm instead of entering his ribs. Pain burned through him. He caught the attacker's wrist. The man was human. Confusion swept the hall. Then Matthias saw a narrow blue thread hidden beneath his sleeve. Stone branch. Avelka crossed the floor with terrifying speed. She struck the attacker hard enough to send him across the stones. Guards seized him. Avelka saw the blood on Matthias's arm. Rage transformed her face. For one moment, Matthias understood exactly why enemies feared First Hearth. She looked ready to kill the attacker herself. Matthias said her name. Avelka looked at him. He shook his head. The hall watched. She forced herself back under control. The prisoner lived. By morning, the evidence finally closed around Varek. The assassin had been paid through the missing quartermaster. He admitted receiving orders meant to turn Matthias's death into another source of mistrust between North and South. Combined with the harness, payment token, and earlier prisoners, the council issued an arrest order. Varek fled. Scouts found his trail heading toward an abandoned watchfort in the western hills. Avelka prepared to ride after him. The elders objected. Matthias did too. Avelka stared at him. He clarified that he objected to her going without him. She pointed at his bandaged arm. Matthias pointed at the scar beneath her ribs. Odrissa looked deeply tired of both of them. They rode at dawn with 40 guards. The watchfort stood on a narrow ridge. Part of one wall collapsed, and its wooden gate grey from years of weather. Varek had fewer than 20 followers remaining. Avelka stopped her force outside bow range. She did not attack. She rode forward with Odrissa and Matthias. Varek appeared above the broken wall. His men looked exhausted. Avelka ordered him to surrender and face judgment. Varek refused. Then, perhaps realizing that denial was ending, he finally defended what he had done. Human roads were spreading north. Southern merchants brought tools and goods that changed local work. Young orcs learned human speech for trade. Old borders softened. Varek saw every change as another piece of the red fur being surrendered. He believed Avelka's marriage alliance would make that loss permanent. Avelka answered that he had mistaken change for conquest. Varek pointed toward Matthias. To him, the trapper represented everything that would follow. One human beside first Hearth today. More influence tomorrow. Matthias listened. Part of him understood the fear. Fear of losing one's world could disguise itself as protection. Matthias had once used fear of loss to keep everyone distant. The difference was that his fear had mostly wounded himself. Varek had decided other people could die for him. Matthias called up to him. If Varek truly believed he was defending his people, he should ask whether those people still wished to die beside him. Silence followed. Varek turned. One warrior lowered his spear. Then another. A third stepped away from the wall. The defeat appeared slowly on Varek's face. It was not Avelka's larger force that broke him. His own men no longer believed loyalty required murder. For several breaths, Varek looked capable of one final attack. Then he removed his sword. The weapon fell from the wall into the snow. The gate opened. Varek walked out alone. Avelka did not celebrate. He had once served Circa, once fought beside people she loved. His fall felt like grief as much as victory. The Council of Branches stripped Varek of command and military privilege. Representatives of all 5 clans would decide his final sentence. Avelka refused to turn personal betrayal into private vengeance. That restraint mattered. With Varek defeated, another question remained. What exactly were Matthias and Avelka becoming? By then they had spent weeks together outside the isolation of the cabin. Matthias had seen Avelka command, compromise, become angry, admit mistakes, and choose law when revenge would have been easier. Avelka had seen Matthias outside his strongest ground. She had seen insecurity, pride, stubbornness, and temper. Neither was in love with an imagined version anymore. One evening, Avelka asked Matthias to walk with her to the northern wall. The valley below lay silver beneath moonlight. She wore a simple, dark red coat rather than ceremonial clothing. Matthias's arm remained wrapped. Avelka reminded him that when she asked him to come north, she deliberately had not asked for marriage. She needed to know whether what existed between them could survive beyond one cabin. Now she knows. She did not want him as a reward for saving her. She did not want him because choosing a human defied Varek. She wanted Matthias Crowell, the man who shared his last food, the man who could be frustratingly proud, the man who solved problems without needing to prove himself stronger, the man who still saw Avelka when everyone else saw first Hearth. Then she made the offer with orc directness, marriage, a home in Drenhold if he wanted it. The mountain cabin was kept as theirs, protection under her seal, a place in council only if he chose one. No forced title, no demand that he stop working with his hands, most importantly, the right to refuse. Matthias felt more overwhelmed than he had during the Avalanche. He asked whether she understood the cost. Some elders might never approve. Humans could call him a traitor. Future children, if they had them, could create political arguments before they were old enough to understand why. Avelka understood. Matthias admitted his deepest fear. He might always feel like the smallest man in every room that mattered. Avelka reminded him that size had already proven itself a poor measure of worth. He smiled. Then he gave his conditions. He wanted no marriage where gratitude became obedience. He wanted to work, return to the mountain, disagree with her when necessary, refuse decisions concerning his own life. Avelka accepted every condition. Matthias asked for one night. She gave it. He did not spend the night repeating every fear he had already faced. He knew what Drenhold was now. He knew who Avelka was. More importantly, he knew who he became around her. Still himself, only less alone. At sunrise, he found Avelka waiting in the courtyard. She looked as if she had slept very little. Matthias admitted he was still afraid. Avelka nodded. He expected to remain afraid for some time. Another nod, then he extended his forearm. Avelka stopped breathing for a moment. The red fur marriage oath began with that gesture. Her green hand closed around his arm. Matthias gripped hers. He accepted. Tears appeared in Avelka's eyes. She looked irritated by them. Matthias smiled. Avelka calmly implied that telling Odrissa about the tears could result in a trapper disappearing permanently in northern woodland. Matthias informed her that threats before breakfast were poor courtship. Avelka laughed. The Council of Branches did not suddenly become unanimous. Some elders still feared succession disputes or human influence. Others had changed. The lower quarter remembered the water channel. Craftsmen knew Matthias's work. Odrissa trusted his loyalty. Stone Branch representatives had noticed that he never blamed their whole clan for Varek's betrayal. The marriage was approved, not because prejudice vanished, because enough people had evidence stronger than fear. Their wedding took place in early spring on the high meadow between north and south. Snowmelt is divided there around a ridge. One stream ran toward human valleys, the other toward red fur land. Matthias liked the place immediately. Human traders gathered along one side, orc families along the other. By the time food was served, the line had already begun to disappear. Matthias wore a dark brown coat made by Drenhold tailors in the mountain style he preferred. Avelka wore deep crimson beneath white fur. The same 5-branch silver clasp from the storm rested in her black braid. Edmund attended quietly. Before the ceremony, he approached Avelka, bowed, and wished them peace. No long apology, no request. Avelka accepted. That was enough. The ceremony combined both traditions. Matthias gave a plain human vow, promising truth, partnership, and a home wherever they built one. Avelka gave the red fur oath, shelter, name, protection, truth, return. The final word meant neither would willingly leave the other. Wondering whether they intended to come back, Matthias liked that promise most. They joined forearms, then hands. Avelka bent down and kissed him. Some human guests stared at her. Tusks. Several orcs appeared surprised that humans considered kissing in front of everyone. Appropriate, a child laughed. Matthias did too. Avelka followed. The tension broke. Marriage did not solve centuries of mistrust. Some southern settlements remained uncomfortable around Avelka. Some orcs still believed Matthias had no place beside First Hearth, but change came in smaller ways. A northern carpenter accepted Matthias's advice without caring that he was human. Southern merchants began trusting red fur patrols. Avelka sent aid to a village whose elders once refused her entry. Matthias helped rebuild a bridge for a clan that had opposed his marriage. No single act erased history. Together, they gave people different stories to remember. Matthias and Avelka lived mostly in Stronghold, but kept the mountain cabin. Avelka refused suggestions to turn it into an estate. Only one improvement became unavoidable. The bed a Stronghold carpenter built, one long enough for her and strong enough that the frame no longer protested every time she sat. Matthias kept the cracked piece from the old bed. Avelka discovered it hidden in the loft and threatened to burn it. He moved it. She found it again. They eventually agreed it could remain if Matthias stopped showing it to visiting craftsmen. As evidence of orc strength, Edmund and Matthias repaired their relationship slowly, not through more apologies, through ordinary things, occasional supplies carried up the trail, a shared meal. New iron kettle replacing one Matthias insisted only leaked a little. Years did what speeches could not. Several winters after the storm, Matthias and Avelka returned to the mountain cabin during the first heavy snowfall of the season. Avelka had spent weeks buried beneath council matters. Matthias had been helping reinforce grain house roofs. They wanted 3 days without elders, petitions or guards close enough to interrupt. Breakfast? Snow began before dusk. By night it covered the trail. Matthias cooked rabbit stew. Avelka sat at the table wearing a plain dark red wool dress instead of armor. Her black braid rested over one shoulder. Her silver seal remained in Stronghold. For 3 days she intended to rule nothing more complicated than how much firewood Matthias was allowed to carry with a sore shoulder. He placed 2 bowls on the table. Avelka looked into hers. Then his Matthias turned toward the hearth. When he looked back, several pieces of meat had moved from her bowl to his. He stared. Avelka ate with complete innocence. Matthias moved 1 piece back. Avelka moved 2. He surrendered. Some battles taught wisdom. After supper, wind pressed softly against the shutters. The larger bed stood against the wall. The old bearskin still lay beside the hearth. Avelka looked at it and reminded Matthias that he had once slept there because he believed she would destroy his bed. Matthias corrected her. He had slept there because she was injured. He had only suspected she might destroy the bed. Avelka pointed out that she had. Matthias admitted the evidence, favored her version. Later they stepped beneath the covered porch. Snow erased the trail. Below, Avelka's hand closed around Matthias's once. The difference in size had seemed almost impossible. Now it felt ordinary. Her hand was simply her hand. Her tusks were part of the face he knew better than any other. Matthias looked down the mountain. Somewhere beneath the falling snow stood the place where the broken bridal sled had rested. Avelka followed his gaze. They both remembered Edmund. Inside the lower cabin, Avelka. Outside, one door closed, another opened. At the time, Matthias had not believed he was doing anything important. A few steps through, snow, a wool blanket, a bowl of broth, a place beside a fire. Yet everything they built began there. Avelka had crossed the mountain expecting a marriage made from duty. The man promised to her saw fear and turned away. Matthias could have done the same. He could have told himself that the matter belonged to his brother, that Avelka was an orc, that his pantry was too empty, that his cabin was too small, that someone else would come. Instead, he walked into the storm because one fact mattered more than all the others. She needed help. Avelka squeezed his hand. Matthias rested his head against her shoulder. Behind them, 2 bowls waited beside one hearth. Human snowshoes hung near an orc hunting spear. His father's old bow rested beneath her white winter mantle. There, worlds never became identical. They did not need to. Difference simply stopped being a reason to remain divided. Matthias carried Avelka out of the snow. Avelka carried Matthias out of a life where loneliness had begun to look like peace. Neither tried to decide who owed whom anymore. They simply chose each other again and again, for as many winters as the mountain gave them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Orc Bond Saga for more unforgettable human-orc love stories where kindness can change two worlds. And tell us in the comments, would you have opened the door for Avelka that night?